If we don't get to your question right at that moment, we will later. So again, this is the FCI Live Series. Hi, I'm JQ Hanna, the Assistant Director of Food Co-op Initiative. And we are at our Using Data to Drive Decision session, again, with Jess Buttimer from CoApp. We're really excited to have her here and have you all here with us today. And I'm going to turn it over to Jess.
Hi, thank you everyone for coming. I'm so happy to see the turnout. I'm here to talk to you today about using data to segment owners, tailor engagement, and drive decisions. And why am I talking about this? I just want to share a little bit about my background. I am a tech and systems lover. I like to set up systems and explore new technologies to learn how they can facilitate all the things in our lives. And so I've spent over a decade as a user research consultant. That means I've helped Fortune 500 companies with teams of designers, marketers, tech folks, and they would hire me to test their assumptions. So they really knew what they were doing, but they don't know what they don't know. And so that means you have to go and meet with folks who are actually using and interacting with their products or their business and observe what they're doing and find out what's working and what's not. So I primarily did a lot of interviews with people over the past 10 years. I've also been a part of Prairie Food Co-op since about 2015. I'm serving my second term on their board, and I spent a lot of time on the capital campaign planning process and making phone calls, asking owners for money, finding dollars. Done a lot of speaking and networking to kind of promote Prairie Food Co-op throughout our community, and successfully wrote a couple of grants. So really proud that we've been able to raise about $3.2 million in the past year and a half, almost 2 years time. So that work has really informed what I'm going to be talking about today. And then out of that capital campaigning work, I developed an app in partnership with my business partner, Katie Novak, called CoApp. And that was because we needed a tool to manage all of the capital campaign process. And through that process, I'm like, what tools do I need? We made them, and then we made them available to all other cooperatives. So those are the kinds of lenses that I'm bringing to that conversation today. But as we talk, I want to make sure that in this hour that we have together, that you take away 4 things. One, that tailoring engagement is important. It makes people feel special and connected to your co-op. So you have to do it. And you likely already have access to lots of data that will be helpful. So that's the good news. You don't necessarily have to do anything new. You just sort of have to look at what you have. And if you do need something new, you can probably get it pretty easily. And you should do this because it really makes decision-making easier. You're really not just throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. You are saying, hey, this is what we know, and this is what we don't know. So let's do an activity that helps us figure out what we don't know. Or since we know this, let's go do more of that. And it really helps light the way forward. But if it still happens to be a little bit murky for you and you're not sure what to do, then you can just make it an experiment, have fun with it. Say, well, we're not sure. We'll try a couple things and then observe what happens, collect that data, meet as a group to talk about what happened and debrief. So I'd like to dispel a few myths that I think are out there, or maybe that we lean on as crutches in our world because it's sometimes easier to think these things. But first of all, a lot of people think that you have these carefully crafted messages and that they're being read. And that's really not true in most cases. We are all in this information society. It's like drinking from a fire hose. There's a million things coming at us. We have a ton of priorities. And so people are skimming, right? And you need to make, if you have a great crafted message, which you should, you have to make sure that it's easy for people to scan, because they're just going to take the highlights. And if they see something that catches their attention, then maybe that they'll read a little bit more carefully about it.
Just
So
a quick pause. My
yeah.
apologies. We are seeing your notes, not your slides.
Oh,
It's
thank
a
you.
fun thing with Zoom that you sometimes have to stop sharing and and reshare and pick the right screen. Zoom's a pain.
Thank you.
Yep.
See, this is why we should test. Let me see. All right, I still need to see my notes though. So let me see if I bring those back up, if you're still seeing them.
It shouldn't be a problem. Usually if you've picked, oh, we are seeing your notes. How weird.
All right,
yeah, we are.
Stop it again. Well, that's gonna be hard. I'm gonna go from memory here. Let me see. I will try to pick the right button because that must be what I'm not doing.
So one thing that I've learned recently is if you click on the share screen, it'll show everything on your desktop. But if you just do share to that particular document, it won't.
And that is what I'm picking, but let me see it again. All right, because I can put it on a different spot. I just will. Are you still seeing my notes?
We're still seeing your notes.
All right, I'm gonna move them away. Now you're not seeing my notes, hopefully.
We're not.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. Thank you, Jacqueline. I, of course, didn't want that to happen. And they're not as cool as my slides that I made all pretty last night. All right. Okay. So people aren't necessarily reading unless you're looking at my notes. Another myth is that everyone is on social. Certainly they're not all on the same social. And we're a values-based organization. A lot of us are leading with our values, and that's not fitting with everybody to be on social. I know I have really stepped off from social. So and now it feels like I'm not as connected to my co-op, even though I'm on the board, right? Because I'm not seeing all those social messages. So we need to make sure that we're aware of that and we're messaging accordingly through all the channels. Another myth is that there's this idea that transparency, I have to be transparent as a board, so that means I have to share everything. And really, that your message is going to get lost if you're putting too much detail in what you're sharing. So you can give signposts and link to more information, but we can't put everything out there to everybody. And which leads into the next thing that, giving everyone the same message doesn't always mean that they're going to read it, because you're not delivering what they need and what they're going to be able to process. And finally, I think one that gets a lot of us is that there's too many owners for us to get to know them. And you do get a lot of owners, but I think if you work at it pretty hard, you can learn a lot about them, and you can use that to your advantage later. And you're really going to need a lot of that information when it comes to raising money and building the capacity of your organization. So it's worth investing the time, even if you don't get to everybody, but to have that kind of as your goal. I want to meet as many people as I can and learn as much as I can about them, because that's going to help the organization later. So all that to say is that tailoring engagement is important. And so when you want to tailor, it helps to think about your owners in segments. And I love a good Venn diagram. I think there's a lot of ways to build one. And there's probably a lot of ways to build one that would fit for your co-op. This might not be it. As you're looking at this diagram and you think about, well, my buckets would be different, feel free to put that kind of thing in the chat. But this framework has really helped me as I've created a pitch deck library that I take to my speaking engagements. And I just pick certain slides that I know are going to resonate with a certain audience. Sorry, I'm probably showing you some other stuff on my screen there.
Nope, you're not.
Okay, all right. Try not to lose the chat.
So are these, if I can ask, it looks to me like these 4 circles are kind of the core values of your co-op. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's what I have found has really resonated with the different owner segments, right? So I have people who really care about business and making sure that economic development is something that's happening in their community. So they don't care about that fluffy stuff. They don't care that it's a grocery store with mission driven values. They care that it's going to bring shoppers to the area, right? And so you can't blather on and on about this, you know, crunchy tree hugger stuff to those people. They tune it out and they sort of discredit you a little bit as those hippy dippy people, right? But so they want to hear the numbers and the pro formas and that you've really thought through and you have these 10-year projections and this is how far afield you're going to be bringing shoppers because you're the only one in perhaps your whole county like we are.
That's such a beautiful response. I don't know if the structure of your this presentation, because I'm late as always, but I wanted to ask, do you have a story that you have in mind when you responded to that, Jess? It seems that you have actual experience where you learned that or that hit you.
Yeah, right. So in terms of economic development, when you're working with village governments and county governments, they're really there for the economic development piece of it. And there's grant dollars there. So you have to get on board with that idea. And really looking at their strategic plans that they have for their villages or their counties and saying, how do we fit in? What are we going to achieve? How are we as a co-op going to help them achieve their objectives for their village or their county? And so really we've been able to tailor our presentations to those folks in that way with that mindset. But I would say the biggest group, and maybe it's because it was what I'm most passionate about, is the environmental group. I mean, there's tons of environmental groups and they're going to eat all that stuff up. We're going to talk about packaging and we're going to talk about bulk bins and, you know, the experience that they're going to have in the store and how when they come home, they're not throwing away half the stuff they just bought because it's half of its packaging, you know. So those two buckets really help me a lot, as does the community. You've got people who don't really care, again, about all the value stuff. They just know they want a grocery store in their community, or they're community activists and they want to say, hey, I want to make my community better and we don't have a grocery store. And so I just want it here. Not because I care about the economics of it, but because I care of the service that it gives to the community. And then, you know, our piece of, well, it's not just a grocery store. You can gather here and we're going to have classes and we're going to have events and we're going to bring people together really resonates. And then you have health and nutrition. Health systems really care about health outcomes, and fresh food is a really big part of that. They embrace it. It's on NPR these days. They're talking a lot about it right now, about how food's going to be prescribed. And so if you're not working with the health system, you should be, right? And there's lots of opportunities for them to infuse their expertise into what you do and to introduce you to their audiences and have a partnership. But there's a lot of other areas in this Venn diagram where you can kind of tease out. And again, I'm not sure this is the right way. I think if we had a big group together, we could sort of brainstorm what the right pieces of this bucket are. We could come up with even more, but education is a huge piece. We're teaching people things. We're teaching people not only about local foods and local farms, but how to prepare food and buying things on a budget. And that resonates with a lot of different audiences. Particularly, you've got your food security folks. Those are organizations that already exist in your neighborhoods and you can tap into them. I would, local farmers, I think, would be bigger. It's not as big for us because in our county, we barely have any food farmers. And so they're just a small fraction of our ownership and kind of how we do things, but we try to leverage them as much as possible. We still have to think about them. And some people, that's the reason they're into this. Maybe they come from farmer backgrounds and they really want to support local farmers. And you've got your foodies in there who just like food. So there's lots of different ways to look at why people are coming to you and what they care about. So why they've latched on to become owners. And so it helps to think about those buckets for a lot of reasons. One way that it translated into data for us is that we put together a what we call a stakeholder matrix. And so this is a massive spreadsheet that helped at least me think through, okay, if these are our causes, what are the groups in my community that are already active relative to those causes? Let's visit their website. Let's see who is on their staff. Let's see who's on their board. Let's pull up their annual report and see who gave to that organization, and get their donor list. And then let's cross-reference that with our owner list. So who in that organization is one of our owners, and can we talk to them and say, hey, I see that you're involved with XYZ organization. What opportunities exist for you to talk about our co-op with that organization? Or can we come in? How can we partner so that your audience becomes our audience becomes your audience? And frankly, if you have events that you already have lots of volunteers for and they're organizing and running, how can we show up and be present? Maybe lend a helping hand, but definitely have our t-shirts on and our marketing out so that we can kind of associate ourselves with your mission because they're aligned, and that's the reason people are coming to us. So maybe this isn't how you think of data, but I certainly do, because it gives you a framework for saying, where are our gaps, right? We don't have any owners in the organization. So that's one we have to get into. One of the columns is, when did we last present? So most of these community organizations are looking for speakers. My husband's in the Lions Club and his job is to schedule speakers. So he doesn't want everybody, the same people every year, but every 2 to 3 years, you can be hitting the same organizations and get in kind of a pattern. So they know you. It's also helpful if you have people who are just going regularly because they care about that organization and they care about both, and they can just be mentioning Prairie Food Co. Oh, I've been really busy with the co-op. That's my favorite, right? How are you doing, Jess? Oh, I've been really busy with the co-op. We're doing such great things. Can I tell you about it? I don't ask for permission. I just go into it. But, finding ways to bring the co-op up in all the different settings where it helps raise people's curiosity about what's going on. Any other suggestions come through for the segmenting by cause? Do you feel like I've missed any?
I didn't see any comments show up in the chat. Please do go ahead and throw in, if you think it'd be different, some of the segmentings for your co-op. I just think this is I'm like, oh, we're going to have you back for a whole separate presentation where you show how you use the segmenting to change your presentations and stuff. I do think for some of you on the call, some of these would be maybe a little different. Like environment, I know for some of our startups is not nearly that huge a bubble. Anyone have any comments they want to throw in about what they think some of their segments might be? All right, people are just social justice, racial justice. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I was expecting that one. Yeah, Amanda, great. And the economic one staying, but having a different angle. I think for some folks there's the economic people, the way Jess described them. You might should have a second economic bubble that means keeping money rooted within the Black community and historically Black neighborhood. You need to talk to the city economic and the neighborhood economic. I thought that one might come up too.
Absolutely. Great suggestions.
Does anyone ever get to the point of too many segments, Alia?
I think when it stops being helpful, it stops being helpful, right? But a lot of times, if you're looking for something to do or some programming to host, and you have to decide, you certainly maybe want to prioritize your segments. But I feel like it helps to just wear that hat for a minute and say, if I'm in this segment, what do I need? What am I looking for? And then, how does the co-op fit into that? And just by doing that, you've tailored an engagement. You're going to invite everybody, right? But now suddenly you appeal to a core group of people versus the scattershot method. Like, we're going to try to create an event that just appeals to everyone. and appeals to no one all at the same time, right? I think we can fall into that sometime because we haven't worn the hat of the segment we're going after.
That's an awesome insight. We talk a lot about learning to look at your vision and mission through the different angles and lenses, but this really clarifies it. That's awesome, Jess.
So I have some other ways of looking at the ownership that I find helpful as well. Certainly when it comes to planning the capital campaign, we have to be thinking about engagement level and for outreach as well, I'm sure, although I'm not on that committee, but so you have to think about how are people kind of moving through that life cycle with the co-op, where they totally unaware to curious to maybe they're on your mailing list, and then they go to an event, and then they become an owner, or do they volunteer? We're not sure what order. Sometimes a lot of people go out of order on this thing, but eventually you want them to become an owner, you want them to volunteer, and you want them to become either a donor or an investor. So looking at that engagement level. I think that in Mary's question, I will get to that in a minute about data collection. So hold that thought. Another one is life stage. Depending on your life stage, you need different things, right? We can look at kids, and kids are sort of a gateway to families. And so what are families trying to achieve when they're thinking about the co-op? Perhaps they're health and nutrition driven. For their kids, maybe they want them to be connected to the land. There's not maybe a lot of opportunities where you are to do that. So talking to kids and families about, hey, what could we be doing in terms of programming for you, young adult students, particularly those in high school or college. They are looking for service learning opportunities to fill out their resume. So if you have things that are that would be good for an intern, or even if it's event-based, it maybe doesn't need to have high skills, but certainly like in our community college, there's a lot of great talent there that we can tap into. So, thinking about those young adult students, what brings them there? Our young professionals, they may not have a lot of time. They're building their career, but maybe they have extra funds, right? So they're willing to engage in an experience, right? They might have a few extra dollars and extra time to be looking for something that's entertaining and fun for them. Empty nesters are great because they could be more volunteers as well as your retired folks. You want to know where they are on life stage. This is also going to become important later in your capital campaign, because as people reach a certain age, they have to take money out of their retirement funds. If they're fortunate to have them, and they're looking to put them places, right? So it's helpful from that perspective as well to know where people are in their life stage, if they might be having these portfolios that they need to manage and put funds towards good causes like yours. Profession is another huge one. You need skills in your organization. And so you have owners with those skills, but it's like, okay, how do I find these people with the marketing talents? And how can I engage with those marketing folks to extract their talent and put it towards the co-op in a way that is good for them and good for us. And certainly with nutritionists and possible events, there's a lot of opportunities for partnerships. If you want extra credit, you can take each one of these segments and you can go on. This is a template from Canva. I did not create this, but if you type in personas, I think, or journey mapping, they'll have a bunch of templates that come up, and they're all relatively the same. They just look different. But you can kind of dive into describing that segment or that persona. And I would recommend, maybe you could do it as an individual, but I think, having a core group of folks who want to brainstorm around these personas and look at, what makes them unique as a segment. Let's describe their needs and their challenges, and then our opportunities as a co-op to sort of put ourselves in front of them, or to have them come to our event and have them volunteer. I think those are probably the things that you're most looking towards, or eventually what's going to get them to eventually become an investor. This next part is this mapping, this customer journey. I've done this professionally. I haven't actually done it for the co-op. I think it would be a really fun exercise, but that's that idea of that engagement level from when you're going from totally unaware and co-op curious all the way to investing. How do you move through those stages? What kind of information do we need to teach you as a co-op to level you up? What kinds of experiences do we need to provide to you to level you up to the next stage, right? And maybe it's swag, right? Maybe you have like a series of swag things that incentivize some learning experiences or some event experiences, so that they try to be the model co-op owner. Like, this is what you need to do as a co-op. You've just bought into a business, right? Here are some things that you could do to be a really great business owner for the co-op. So I think this would be a really fun exercise. And again, these templates are just on Canva. So when we talk about those segments, and we're going to use them to tailor the engagement, what does that really mean? So it is your programming. What events are going to be useful for people and engaging, and that they're going to want to come to, and you're going to have a high turnout, good return on investment, but also partnerships. There's all these organizations and these cause-based segments that are already doing really good work, and they have a foundation of events and people and resources, right? And how can you tap into that? The serial campaigns is one that I like to think about. This can happen either as a series of events, a series of videos, a series of emails, a series of Facebook posts, but it's really around this idea is we've got to give people bite-sized information, but we want them to learn this whole volume of things. So if we're thinking about a new owner, maybe you can come up with a drip email marketing campaign that you just have scheduled. So you can set it up in your MailChimp or whatever, so that whenever there's a new owner, it says, okay, for the next 6 months, I'm going to send this series of emails every 4 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever cadence you think is the right thing for your owners. Because by that time they get to the end of this, maybe they will have learned XYZ thing, and they'll earn a t-shirt or a yard sign.
Now, I'm going to wait, Jess, because I have a funny feeling you're going to cover all this, but I want the people asking to hear this. I gave some direct messages, some in the chat. People are very much like, how do we get this data? How do we ask for it? Where do we put it? I think Jess is getting there, but I just wanted to say, we heard you guys, absolutely. If Jess doesn't cover it, we'll get there.
Excuse me. I do think I'm getting there, but if I don't, let me know. Asking for advice is another great one. Like if you want to get somebody to give you money, ask them for advice first, right? You can't come to them out of the blue and expect that they're gonna just open their wallet. So first, you've got to be talking to them about what they know and hearing their experience and their stories and what they can teach you, right? So there's a lot of ways to do that. And I'll get into those. And just a reminder that when you're tailoring those things, you also have to be making sure that you're covering all your channels, right? So not everybody's reading your email. You've got some unsubscribes. How are you handling those? I mean, people have unsubscribed. Are you mailing them something every once in a while? Or they're just totally off the radar? Or do you know that those folks are following you on social media? We don't want people to fall through the cracks. So you've got all your different socials. You want to make sure you're doing video. We can do in-person events. Maybe they're really large gatherings. But don't forget, Zoom is really good. I mean, people come to Zoom events. So you can get really good attendance. And those small coffees, like if you have a professional group that you want to tap into, get 2 or 3 people together and say, I need advice on this problem. Can I talk to you about what I'm facing, and can you help me? And also picking up the phone. We need to be training volunteers to pick up the phone so that we're not doing it the first time on our capital campaign. So it would be great if we had people with that skill set and experience who had been doing it for the co-op already. So I think this is the slide people have been waiting for. And it's not necessarily a sequential process, so it could be. But you're already gathering a lot of information on your ownership application. Address tells you a lot. You can map all the addresses. You can start looking at whether or not you have pockets where people are kind of talking to their neighbors or not, or maybe there's an opportunity where you have somebody who's really, really active, but none of their neighbors have joined. So, hey, maybe that's a house party. And then on our application, we have, why did you choose to become an owner? Not everybody fills it out, but the people who do have given us really rich information about their cause that they care about. And that has been really helpful in our capital campaign, that we can preview that. So in CoApp, that's, we pull that in, and that's at the top of their contact dashboard page, so that we can see before we call them that this is the reason they joined us. Other household members, you can get a sense of, is it a family? Is it a singleton? Is it a couple? That can give you even a conversation like, hey, I see you've got 4 names in your household application. How old are your kids? And then you can learn more about them. I mean, people like to talk about their kids. Birthday is one we don't collect, but I wish we did. I think if you can add it, you should, because again, it gives you a sense of their age and where they are at in their life stage. Be a social sleuth. I think when new owners come in, if you have volunteers that are responsible for onboarding, have them look them up on LinkedIn, connect to them. If you have a LinkedIn profile, connect to them if you can, because you're going to get their job title and where they work. And that's very rich. I did an import. So this is a little bit tricky. You may not decide to do this. I didn't love how it worked, but I had a spreadsheet of all my owners with their email and their phone number, if we had them. And I uploaded it into our LinkedIn profile for Prairie Food Co-op, our contact book. And once you do that, it connects by the phone numbers or the emails and says, and asks them to be friends with you or to link to you. But whether or not they choose to link with you, you can then see their information in their profile. And that was a manual process then to look them up, but I could click on them through LinkedIn and look them up and say, okay, this is their job. This is where they work. And I could put that into our CRM system, so that then I could pull a report and say, who are all my marketing people? Who are all my finance people? Who are my business owners? And these are people who may have told us those things, but most likely didn't. So we had a lot of business owners that we didn't know were business owners. So
yes, quick question. You would use the acronym CRM. What does that stand for?
Yeah, that's a customer relationship management application. And so for us, it's Nation Builder. There are a lot out there. HubSpot, I think, is one. But where are you keeping, it might just be a spreadsheet for you. Hopefully you have at least a spreadsheet, right? But it's a list of all your owners and everything that you know about them. If it's more than a spreadsheet, you can then usually say, oh, this is the events they've come to. These are the emails they've opened. This is all the times that I called them or emailed them. You can get pretty sophisticated with your CRM system.
And CoApp is also one as well, right?
Yes. Yeah. We're primarily a capital campaign management system. So we help you manage your campaign, but that's our area of development. We want to get to become a more robust CRM system, so you can do all those things as well. Another great thing about this social piece is when you're looking them up in these different accounts, you can see who they're connected to, right? So if, particularly in LinkedIn, this is very valuable. And that would take a lot more time. I can't say that I actually did that, but for all of the owners, but certainly if you're saying, hey, on my stakeholder matrix, I noticed we have this organization that we don't have anybody in, and these are all of the people. Well, I can look those people up on LinkedIn and see if they're connected to any of the people that I'm already connected to through LinkedIn. So that can be a really useful tool to find your way to somebody. Google Search Alert is one that I've played with a little bit. That could be useful. I haven't done that a lot. I'm not really in that role that would be useful for me. But, you know, if there are kind of some movers and shakers in your ownership that would make the news, or just like the local news, like every once in a while, maybe elected officials or primarily elected officials, but or people who are or different organizations that you're connected to and partnering with, you could put them in your Google search alert so that if something happens in the news for them, you'll see it, it'll email to you, and you can sit, and then you can reach out to them and say, hey, I saw this great article in the news about you. Congratulations on that event or that milestone. Another thing that people often think about is surveys, and those are really good. You can put one together using Google Forms, super easy, pretty straightforward. There are also other tools that are not as straightforward. So, you know, if you're techie, you can do those. But surveys can be turned into phone calls and coffees as well. So don't forget that you can do different channels based on your audience, and it depends on your goal as well too, right? Are you trying to get it for everyone, or are you just trying to learn a little bit from a few different people? But maybe when somebody becomes an owner, you've streamlined your ownership application and you made it as few questions as possible, right? So that doesn't turn anybody away. But then you follow it up with, hey, we'd like to learn more about you and your interests. And so here's some questions. As a new owner, these are things we want to learn about you and why. And you could follow up with, hey, we notice XYZ as, on your household account, right? They want to be able to use the membership when they're in the store. Can you tell us a little bit more about them? What are their ages? That's going to be an important one. Age is pretty important later in the capital campaign, so that you know who you need to reach out to. JQ, anyone that I need to attend to in the...
We got lots of questions about the pragmatism, just like, how do we collect this data? Who should be in charge of collecting this data? All that kind of stuff. But I think we're still, for what you're discussing right now, I think we're good, but I just want to make sure we get time to get to some of those, you know, as an organizer, how do you make this all work stuff?
Right. I mean, it's a lot of, you definitely probably need somebody who's caring and dedicated about doing this work, right? And building a team that does this. Your newsletter, there's a lot of rich information in your MailChimp or Constant Contacts on certainly open rates and click rates. And I think when you think about your engagement level, it takes more engagement for somebody to click. So if you're structuring your email newsletter so there's really nothing for them to click on, you're missing an opportunity to gauge ownership and to gauge engagement level. So if you can, in your newsletters, be thoughtful about trying in each one or most of them to have a reason for people to click, so that you can see who's opening, but who's clicking, right? They're a little bit more engaged. And if I'm going to target some efforts, maybe it would be to those people. And also, who's not opening? You need to know who you're missing and figure out how to get to them, because that's important for your campaign later. If you've not figured out how to engage them since they joined, what are the odds that they're going to give you money? It's really not likely. So you want to find a way to bring them in. Focus groups, that's kind of something that I've done in the market research world, but you don't have to be a professional to do that. It's really getting a group of people in a room to share ideas, and you might have 10 questions that you want to pose to the group. And you might not get through all those 10 questions in an hour, but I had pretty good success with our marketing folks that I found through LinkedIn, and I sent them all an email and I said, hey, we're about to do this campaign. We've prepared these materials. We think they're pretty good, but we want to make them better, right? So can you spare an hour? And that, I got great response to that. I think I sent the email to 12. I got at least 6 that said they would come, because it's just an hour, right? And you can even incentivize these things. If you're not getting the response you need, throw a t-shirt, a branded t-shirt into it, or a gift card to a local business, or make it a raffle if you only want to have one gift. But that's a great tool as well, because at the focus group, you're going to learn something that you didn't know before. You just are. Things are going to come out in the conversation that you didn't hear before. And the people that come are either going to walk away with the impression that, wow, that's really impressive. It's not going to be a drag if I have to volunteer for them because they've got it together. Or they might say, wow, I really want this co-op to be successful, and it seems like they have a gap. I don't know how I became muted.
My apologies. I was trying to mute someone else. Sorry. That was my fault. Moving on.
Yeah. So, they're going to walk away with an impression of the co-op that's new and more informed. And it might lead to them volunteering and engaging more because they've gotten a taste of what you are and how much more they want to move the ball down the field for you. So talking about the data that you already have, this is a graph that was from the CoApp Insights report, where we combined data from 3 different co-ops, 3 to 6, depending on the graphs that we were showing, and looked at ownership growth by year. But here I'm just showing Prairie Food Co-op's ownership growth by year. So we average about 136 new owners a year, which I think is fantastic. We do a great job. The range was anywhere from 75 in 2020 to 175 in 2016. And then in 2021, the year of our capital campaign, we more than doubled our best year. And that's a pretty consistent trend among the 3 co-ops that we looked at, that your capital campaign year, you're doing a lot more heavy communication. You're getting a lot more people. So this kind of tells you, hey, 136, that's a pretty good goal. I could have that as my goal for the year, or I could bump it up. It would be realistic to say, let's try for 150 this year, right? So now you can set some targets that have a basis in reality. But if you take this data a little bit further, and this is just ownership dates, right? You already have this data. I put this in, and this is just an Excel chart. I don't have directions for how to do this, but I could come up with them eventually. But what it is, it's taken all the years and look at the month and the average owner growth by month. And then each one of these colored lines shows you the variance for the year. So the brown bar is the average. So you can see that Prairie Food Co-op on average really had strong April, May, Junes, and Octobers, but really not so great Augusts and Decembers. So what can you do with this data? Well, you can say, hey, August and December, that's family time, right? For our families going back to school, if that's primarily who our volunteers are, that's a time where they can't really do any of this outreach, right? So can we reach out to our folks at a different life stage and say, hey, let's do a focus group with you, and say, we noticed that we're not getting a lot of owners in August. What do you think we could do to get owners in your life stage in that month, is there an event that would appeal to people like you, or that you would like to host or organize, right? That's where that kind of thing could lead, because our, you know, if this is true, and it is true of Prairie Food Co-op, most of our volunteers have families, you know, can you fill that gap? And then look at all these outliers, right? So February of 2018, I want to see, what were we doing that we did so great in an otherwise lackluster month, right? What were we doing at each of these peaks where we went above average, and how can we repeat it, right? Because now we can say that's what worked. Why did it work? Was it a good event? Was it a really great email? Let's look at what we were doing then to help us understand the return on investment for these was fantastic. What we were doing, you know, here in February of 2015 and March was not a good return on investment. Let's not repeat that. Another way to get data, or to make it kind of an experiment, is to do something called A/B testing. So you can have multiple versions of a message, and you don't know which one is going to work, right? We do that. We're editing constantly. We're wordsmithing all these things, and maybe spend less time on perfecting the perfect message, because there isn't one, and come up with 3 different types of strategies, right? We had a campaign in February, which is kind of a downtime, as you saw from the chart, where we wanted to raise money, but we wanted it to be really low effort. So we just did an email campaign and asked people to contribute $22, because we had like 1,400 owners, but only 400 donors. So that was like 1,000 people who had not contributed to our campaign after 2 phases in a year of trying to raise this money. So it was a Hail Mary, right? We were tired. So I created 3 different headlines, subject lines, and 3 different calls to action. And I used a tool called GMass. It's a tool that Foodshed recommended to me. And it allowed me to just to put everybody I wanted to email in a spreadsheet and set up my email, and it sent to the first 200 people and said, out of these 200 people, this is the message that got the most opens and the most clicks. And so then I could say, yep, that's the winner. And then it sent the message to the 800 people, and with that winning message. And in case you're curious, we had, what worked was a little bit of guilt. Hey, over 500 owners have already contributed, right? Will you join us? It's just $22. So that was really helpful. So hopefully if you had these takeaways, I'm going to open it up for questions. I realize we only have 10 minutes. I thought it was going to take me less time to get through this, but we had some good questions along the way. And I do have about 10 minutes after the hour, to keep answering questions for anyone who can stay. JQ, do you have any prioritized, or should I just go into the chat here?
I think if that's where we're at, I think people are asking, you know, basically, I think some great questions from Amanda. We could actually just ask Amanda to unmute, but she's like, you know, great, you know, we like asking people for all this information, but we find they get exhausted with being asked, you know, all these surveys, all these questions. So she was asking for a little strategy around that. The other question, which was also hers, was putting all this data and this owner management of data into the database and crunching it versus being out there and asking for owners. Are those two, do you see those roles as combined or separate? So any of those, I think, are a great place to dive in.
Yeah, well, I feel like you have people who like to crunch the data, and you have people who like to talk to people, and they're not usually the same person. I might be a little weird in that I am that same person. So I certainly think that you can have different groups of people doing that, as long as they're talking to each other, right? You can't do all this data crunching and then not utilize it. In terms of how often you want to go to people with surveys, right? This is why I said surveys can become phone calls, can become coffees. You probably at most want to do 2 surveys a year, right?
I would say more than 1 a year does exhaust people unless they're in very different topics. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So I could see, and it depends, like how targeted is it? How long is it, right? You probably don't ever want to have a survey that's more than 10 questions. That's kind of, people have short attention spans, but if you did 2 that were 3 questions, you know, that's not really that big of a deal. So it kind of depends how long your surveys are as well.
And part of my question was actually, where do you park the data? Like if you're doing survey, like we use Salesforce, so we can theoretically collect information and get it to spit into Salesforce, but it's pretty sophisticated to do that. So, you know, our ownership form by design is kind of simple, and we decided that we wouldn't collect a lot of data from people. But then if you collect it through surveys, are you filling that in your database somewhere in notes, fields, or how do you preserve it for future use?
Yeah, it kind of depends on the kinds of questions you're asking. Like if it's demographics, certainly you probably have fields already in your CRM system, like for age. A lot of them will have title and job and things like that, but you would probably have to create it for any interest-based ones that you added. And so most CRMs will have the ability to add custom fields, and you can dump a lot in there. I think it's hard to answer that question because it really depends on the data and how you intend to use it, and what you want to get out of it.
I think that's where another one of these questions, we had a question come up, which like, it sounds like you're collecting data like every time you interact with owners, and lots of different people from our co-op are interacting with owners. Is there some kind of form where people are maybe writing down what they noticed, what they found out? How do you make it so, you know, they're kind of like, we don't have just one person who's doing all this interaction. How do we collect this info?
Right. Yes. So I don't want to plug CoApp, but one of the things that is good for CoApp that you can look for in any CRM system, and they probably have this, is that it's easy to use on your phone and your or your tablet, as well as your computer. So for me, I know when I was out at events, I could look people up. Like if I saw them over there and I was like, oh, I want to talk to them, but I don't remember anything about them. But like I could get, somebody would tell me their name, or I'd remember enough of their name that I could find them, look at the history. And then if I had my conversation, I could go off into a little corner and make a note that I saw them at this event and we talked about XYZ. So that was really useful. If you're doing surveys and you're having trouble getting responses, you could have iPads up that just are open to your survey, and you could direct people to do it. There's usually ebbs and flows in in-person events where people would kind of do that for you because it's just one more thing to do.
Other questions, folks? Comments before we wrap up real quick? I'm going to take a few minutes here at the end to wrap up.
I don't have a direct question to the presentation, but I'm just wondering, when you record these, does that also preserve the chats? Because there's a lot of great information in there.
It doesn't preserve the chats. What we're starting to do based on request is the sessions that have lively chats, I am downloading them, editing them to take names out and sending them out with the wrap-up email. So that will come out sometime in the next 24 hours. Since this one had a lot of data in it, I will clean this one up and send it out. All right. Well, I want to make sure we take a moment to thank Jess for her time with us today. This was terrific. I know we've had so many questions on this, so it was just super, super exciting. I real quick just want to take a moment of your time. And Jess said she would stay after. For those who have time, who want us to ask a few more questions, might feel more comfortable, like it being more everyone unmutes and discusses, we'll do that for a few minutes right after we wrap up. Just want to real quick, again, say coming up today, we have 2 more coming up today. Today's unusual. We have 7 Roots coming to talk about what is the difference between preliminary store design and full store design. It's confusing, especially for a lot of startups. How does that work? They're going to be here discussing that today at 2 p.m. Central. And then we have tonight To Be a White Ally in Food Justice with Patrice Lockhart-Anthony from Black Label Consulting. Been a lot of interest in that one. And then tomorrow we'll pick it up with going back to board functioning with Joel Kofishki from 7 Roots. A perfect month in the life of your board. So there's some great stuff coming up. Hopefully you've been getting the registration emails. Want to take a quick second to thank all of our sponsors that make this series possible. We could not do it without the USDA, National Cooperative Bank, National Cooperative Grocers, and CoBank and their support. But I want to thank again, just one more time, take a moment to jazz hands, however you want to do it. Thank Jess. This was absolutely phenomenal. And so much of what people have said they have needed. And just appreciation to her. And again, I'll be sending out a wrap-up email, which will have Jess's email, the link to her website, as well as a very quick survey that we ask you to take. It takes 2 or 3 minutes. It's like 3 questions about how this session served you, so we can continue to provide content that really works for you and meets your needs. And with that,